here we are. This is Sex Love Psychedelics, and I'm your host, Dr. Kat, bringing you psychosexual conversations that will leave you intellectually turned on and hungry for more.
One thing that I really appreciate about what you're describing here is that I want to pinpoint for people, because I think a lot of people can be confused about orgasms. You know, I read articles and they're like, there's 9 different orgasms, there's this many orgasms, or there's, only 3 types of orgasms. And what I love about what you're saying, you're describing there are different nerves, and that can create different textures in our body of pleasure, and different, it helps us to understand more about like what we're talking about with A spot, P spot, G spot, because they're all hitting on different nerves. Can you explain what that would look like for if that's different for female anatomy and a male anatomy?
Yeah, and in the book, I actually I did all I did all custom diagram, because there's not very useful one out in the internet. So I really mapped it out, like the nerves between like male body and female body and where it lays. That's why the deeper anal stuff. So, but the concept I use is called pleasure wiring. So we might vary slightly in our exact location of where those nerve lies on a genital. So some people might be a little bit to the left, to the right. Everybody have their like spot. I have one new lover that her dorsal nerve is where the usually connects to the clit. It's a little bit higher on her pubic mound. So when you touch the clit directly, nothing, but like 1.5 inch above her clit on her pubic mound, like fireworks. So there is the idea of pleasure wiring that everybody's varies a little bit because of where the physical nerve location, right? So like every different phone has different button location, but the power button is still there, kind of thing, right? So so you have to discover that unique genital, like where the nerves lay out. And there's 4 distinct nerves that goes back to your brain, which is the most important, because that subjective experience happened in your brain. But what is really cool is that if you able to, so I use the term, I think a lot of people use it, pleasure mapping, right? So you have to understand where the pleasure wiring, map that individual. And then to me is all the various spot of orgasm. It's just that you have like different keys on a piano, right? That you can make music with. So I think in scientific culture, we really want to isolate one particular key to induce a orgasm, and we want to associate that orgasm with that one spot. But in practice, they usually, like, some people might really like isolation, but I think many people would prefer like a blend of the different keys. And what I have found that is useful with this concept where the nerves and how it works is that you could actually think of, I mean, I taught fitness for so long, so I use a lot of fitness or cooking analogies. It's my favorite things. So it's like sort of circuit training. So you could you could start with external stimulation to the clit, then you could work the G spot, and then you could do cervical or anal, or you could do a combo of like anal and clitoris, right? And you give time for the other nerve to rest, so you could keep the orgasm going, because one is fresh, the other one is just going through one cycle. So to me, it's really about like there's no you could play just one key, but it's about understanding all the notes that this particular piano could make, and then what kind of music that arouses that particular person the most. So I think combining those are really useful, but isolating it helps you in the mapping process. So
and like you were saying earlier, you used the word calibration, to be able to know exactly where these parts are, so you know how to play the piano, this particular piano.
And then it also changes with time, right? Because like how you like something in the beginning might change at the end. But one thing that I learned recently, we were nerding out a little bit before this podcast started, about this idea about entrainment, like this sort of psychedelic experience where rhythm kind of takes you over. Like I remember last time I was on acid at a festival where the music feels like I'm one with the music. It's just everything in that state. So the hypothesis is that the orgasm is actually quite similar to get into that state where like rhythm, like when you're just about there, it stays on rhythm. So if you break rhythm, That's
Yeah.
why it's like the most annoying thing is that when you're doing something really good and people got into rhythm and you decided to change some shit, that's when it's the most annoying, because I was getting there and then you switch. So for any of you who like to give, when things are going well, stick with it. Stay on rhythm. So I think getting into rhythm is really important when it comes to calibrating. So once you're in rhythm, then stay with that rhythm and without changing much. But you could also play different notes within that rhythm without breaking rhythm. So
Yeah,
I
it's
think
like EDM music. You know, you like the EDM music, the ones that just go da, 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 but then they like do a da da da, and you're like, oh, it just feels good.
yeah,
But
but
you
there's a
still have
longer
that layer
pattern. There's
under
still a
there.
layer
Yeah.
pattern. Yeah, but you could like play it with a longer timeline because it's not, yeah, it's beautiful when you could turn it into music,
Well, that was fun. Thanks for tuning in, lovers. And if you want to experience more ecstasy and sexual liberation, head over to sexlovepsychedelics.com and learn about how you can join me for any one of my online or live events. And while you're there, grab my free guide on sex and psychedelics. Remember, this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Please contact your healthcare provider and local law before pursuing any of the products or psychedelics discussed. And one final note here. I make this show specifically for you. If you're loving the show, then be sure to leave me a review in iTunes or Spotify to let me know. Happy to be here and happy to serve. I'll see you next time on Sex Love Psychedelics.